Let me paint a picture for you. So you're standing in a field at sunset. The light's gold and fading. It's the magic hour. And above you, there's a flock of birds, and they're sweeping through the sky, hundreds, thousands of them, and they're twisting and they're rippling and they're swirling, and it's like liquid smoke out of a sci-fi show, and you're just mesmerized by it. You can't track one bird. They're too fast. There's too many. They are overlapping and in constant motion, but you can see the flock. You can see the shape, the rhythm, the truth of what's happening. Now, imagine that instead of birds, that those are people. That's your audience. That's your customers. Those are your customers moving through digital space. That's their customer journey. Every ad impression, every search query, every view, every conversion, it's all these birds in motion. And so for the last 15 years, marketers, us, we've been obsessed with tagging every single bird, and we try to follow each one. We put a cookie on it instead of put a bird on it. We put a cookie on it, and we try and ID it, and we try and fingerprint it, and we have a CRM tag. Whatever we can do, we build systems to say this bird saw this ad at this time, and then later landed on that branch. Conversion. It felt powerful. It felt scientific. We thought finally we can measure everything. We can measure what's going on. But the truth is, when you're trying to tag every bird, you lose sight of the flock. We zoomed in so far, chasing a precision that's just not real, that we traded away reliability. As privacy laws rose up, as tracking broke, as ecosystems closed, all the birds slipped through your fingers. And so what we need to do now with this next era of marketing measurement, it demands that we don't try and chase every bird harder. It's to learn to watch the flock. It's to take a step back and to stop trying to know every click and instead trying to understand the motion of the system. And that's what aggregated data lets us do. I get it. We fell in love with user level data for good reasons. It was intoxicating. Remember the first time you looked at a multi-touch attribution report or like the data-driven attribution in Google Analytics and seeing these channels and all these paths, and this user saw an Instagram, or this set of users saw an Instagram ad and then a Google search, and then they visited the site, and then they got an email, and then they converted, and it just felt great. Like it felt like I understand what's happening. And it gave us stories. It gave us these human stories about how people moved through your marketing, how they were first found, how they got that first touch, and then what they consumed, they read this blog post or they responded to that email, and understanding like, hey, this is what these people are doing, and then they converted. And so, we could say things like John saw our ad 3 times before he purchased, or Facebook assisted in 22% of the conversions, or whatever else generated whatever lift. And they were comfort stories. They were little, tidy cause and effects narratives that gave CMOs confidence. They made agencies look data savvy. They made dashboards addictive. But the truth is, most of these stories were stitched together from fragments. It was sampling. They were biased. They were incomplete. There was so much dark, unknown data that we just kind of ignored, that we didn't know. I remember at one point I ran some tests and trying to determine what actual data we had, and you could see just by simple changes of how you're tracking and what privacy would block, what ad blockers would block and not block, depending on the industry. And this was years ago. This was maybe 2015, 10 years ago. And running these tests and seeing that in certain industries 10 years ago, you were not seeing 75% of your traffic. You were just not seeing it on your website from Google Analytics. And when you think about that, much less some of the traffic, much less when you think about some of the traffic that we did get, even that was not complete. And people were using multiple devices already. They were having conversations between people. They were doing things that were disconnected. That path, that story, that was fiction. It was always fiction. And I will joke that it's attribution models. The old ones in particular, it's like writing a novel by watching people walk into a bookstore. You can see what they buy, but you have no idea what they thought about before they walked in. Yet we've built these billion-dollar budgets around that level of precision. We mistook visibility for truth, and that's okay. It was a natural first step. Digital, it made us feel like we were doing a good job with our measurement, but now it's time to evolve. So let's zoom out. Let's stop watching single birds and start watching the entire flock. And aggregation is what happens when you stop obsessing over individuals and you start paying attention to the collective. So when you look at the pattern and not the points, because when you zoom out, something magical happens. The noise fades and the truth emerges. And aggregation smooths that randomness. All the tiny, unpredictable wing flaps get all canceled out. And what's left is the direction. It's the velocity, it's the momentum. And for marketing, that means instead of asking, did this ad convert this person? We ask, what happens to total conversions when we increase YouTube spend by 20%? Or what's the ROI curve of Meta versus TikTok over the past 6 months? You're not tracking one bird. You're watching how the flock moves when you change the wind. And it turns out that's a far more reliable truth. Aggregated data is stable. It's privacy safe. It aligns with how we actually operate because we don't buy media for one person. We buy it for groups. It's how we decide budget, test creative, forecast growth. So if aggregation is good, why isn't everyone doing it? Because just like the flock, from a distance, it's harder to feel. Aggregates are abstract. They don't give you the warm fuzzies of seeing John clicked an ad. They give you charts and elasticities and probabilities and things that require interpretation. And that's where some people can struggle. And it's not because it's worse data, but because it feels less human. It feels less story-like. And I'm going to be honest, aggregation isn't perfect either. If your flock's too small, you have only a few birds, the motion, it looks erratic. You're never going to detect anything out of it. If you mix flocks, you have some ducks and some geese, the averages are going to lie because sometimes we can't tell why, maybe the ducks converted at 10% versus the geese at 30%. And together it looks like 15. And so by understanding the ducks versus geese, we can see that. So mixing flocks, averages are going to lie. And then also sometimes you can't tell why the flock turned at all. The flocks just, it went that way, right? We can't tell. We just know what it did. So so let's talk about those problems and how we can fix them. When your data set's small, say a handful of conversions a month, very low amount of spend or data, aggregation just becomes unstable. You can't model lift if every sale doubles your conversion rate. At that level, you're not measuring patterns, you're watching randomness. So at a certain point, you need an amount of data. But what can you do instead if you don't have that? Well, you can switch to directional thinking. You can rely on heuristics, blended ROAS, creative click-through rates, or even qualitative signals like post-purchase surveys. You watch which way the flock leans, not every twitch of a wing. And if your click-through rate improves, if your engagement rises, if your branded search climbs, those are your early direction indicators. So another challenge is that not all birds fly alike. And when you lump everything together, you're going to lose nuance. So your average performance might say something like 10% lift, but what if new customers, it was 30%, and returning customers were negative 10%? Average is high diversity. And so the fix for that is cohort-aware aggregation. And that's like segmenting by what matters, your region, your audience, your creative type, your funnel stage. It's like splitting the flock into formations that fly similarly. And then you get some stability, but now your patterns have texture. Aggregates can tell you what happened, not why. Conversions fell 8% last week. Great. Why? Without context, you're still guessing, and that's where structured metadata comes in. So metadata is the wind, the temperature, the season, the environmental context that explains the flock's motion. When you add metadata, the creative type, the channel, the calendar, the geo, the audience cohort, you're suddenly going to start seeing patterns light up. Now you're not just watching the birds turn, you know what's pushing them, right? So that's and then from there, there's the next big step up. Aggregation doesn't have to mean averages. When you enrich that data with AI, prediction, structured metadata, you get what we call intelligent aggregation, or seeing the hidden flocks. So AI and machine learning can see heterogeneity before we can. Even without user IDs, machine learning can find patterns inside your aggregates. At the end of the day, we all do the same stupid stuff. We all behave the same way. Maybe you're different from me, but there's only a certain amount. And in aggregate, we can see it. And so natural clusters, these aggregates, the patterns in there, AI can find them. And it can find these natural clusters that behave differently. And so you feed it metrics like spend, conversions, click-through rate, region, device, creative features, and it clusters campaigns or audience slices that move together. So maybe it discovers value shoppers or brand explorers or impulse buyers or subflocks you've never labeled. Bayesian models can take this even further. They can borrow strength across cohorts and revealing the differences without losing stability. So an example would be running a campaign that looks flat at the aggregate level, but when you apply an unsupervised clustering, the AI can find a cluster and say, we found this one cluster, it's small, but it's really high value, and they react to long form content, and there's another one that's much larger that's ignoring it. And so you can shift your spend away to that smaller cluster and double your efficiency, all just by having AI help you with that, with subflux. That's intelligent aggregation. So having that structured metadata and having that AI looking for those audiences that really can help you suss out more of what the flock is doing. And so then once you have that, the next step is prediction. And so when you train a model on aggregated data to forecast the outcomes, like say conversions or revenue given spend and creative mix, you're teaching your system to anticipate the flock's path. And then when the real flock veers off that path, when reality diverges from your prediction, you get insight. So maybe creative fatigue is setting in. Maybe another competitor has entered the market. Maybe the economy has shifted. The difference between forecast and actual becomes your diagnostic tool. That's predictive, intelligent aggregation, turning measurement from the rear view mirror to radar. So metadata is a language that your data speaks to itself in. It adds the context, like the creative format, the emotion, the color, the duration, voice tone, platform, audience, timing, budget changes. AI can watch thousands of ads and extract descriptors. Was this a funny video or serious? Was this ad indoors or outdoors? Is there a face on the screen, a mountain, a dog? Is the background color blue or red? What's the mood of the voiceover? All that becomes structured metadata. And then when you include that structured metadata in your models, suddenly your aggregated data becomes self-explanatory. And you're not just seeing performance, you're understanding why. AI can analyze your ad library and discover that warm toned outdoor videos under 20 seconds with smiling faces outperform dark studio ads with text overlays. That insight doesn't come from user tracking. It comes from smart aggregation. So now heterogeneity, it's handled by AI. Causality is approached through prediction. Diagnostic blind spots can vanish through this metadata. Aggregation, once seen as crude by some, has suddenly become the most intelligent form of metadata. And let's be fair, sometimes you do need to tag a few birds. User level data still matters for a number of reasons. You could do causality experiments. You can do A/B tests, holdout tests, something where you're controlling your exposure. You can have personalization within your own CRM, your own app, your site. Users have opted into personalization. When they do that, when users opt into personalization, they love it. And debugging, when something breaks and you need to zoom in, it can be useful, but these are microscopes, not telescopes. You use them to validate your aggregates, not to run your strategy. It's like tagging 10 birds with GPS trackers. You don't fly the flock that way, but you can learn how the wind affects them. So summarizing this trade-off, you zoom in and you get resolution, you see feathers, you zoom out, and you get reliability, you see the shape. And the mature marketer knows when to change their lenses. Not every marketer commands a full sky of birds. Some have 10, some have 100,000. The trick is knowing what kind of insight is realistic for your flock size, right? It's hard to just say this number of conversions for this much spend or traffic is a good number to have. But if you have a very tiny flock, you need to use your directional metrics. But if you have 100 conversions, and even if that conversion isn't a purchase, if that conversion is someone who looked at your lead form, whatever you need to get to, if you have 100 conversions, you should be aggregating by week and channel. There's no reason that you shouldn't look at this stuff by channel, by week. Once you get up to 1,000, but if you have 1,000 conversions, you should be doing lightweight regression at the very least. You're over 5,000 conversions. You really should be doing MMM, Bayesian models. You can do stuff earlier. We can do stuff with people that are under 10 conversions, depending on what else they're doing. But at the end of the day, if you have a massive flock of 20,000 conversions a month and you're not doing some kind of hybrid aggregation personalization thing, you're really doing it poorly these days. So the message isn't you need more data. It's you got to find that altitude where your flock's movement stabilizes, and that's where your layer of truth is going to be. We've spent the last 10 years since that example I have in 2015. We've spent the last 10 years and more just staring at feathers. We've been counting them, we've been labeling them, we've been building dashboards full of them. But the truth doesn't live in the feathers, it lives in the flight. The aggregated, predictive, metadata-rich systems are how we can finally stop guessing about what each bird did and start understanding how the flock moves. You don't need to see every bird to steer the flock. You just need to learn to watch the sky. And when you do, when you step back far enough and your data becomes stable and your models become predictive and your metadata adds meaning, you start to see something beautiful. The motion becomes art, the noise becomes music, and marketing measurement becomes what it was always meant to be. Not about tracking people, it's about understanding patterns in the world. The truth in marketing isn't found in the feathers, it's written in the wind.